Chapter 2 Encounter. Without a word to anyone, I arranged to have the ship stop not far from the place where I had met the old men the previous year. Then I took a small motorboat and reached the village. I gave orders to the captain to continue along the trade route. I hoped I would be able, with the help of the local residents, to look up the two old fellows, see the ringing cedar with my own eyes, and determine the cheapest way of getting it back to the ship. Tying the motorboat to a rock on the shore, I was about to head for one of the little houses close by, but spotting a woman standing alone atop the steep riverbank, I decided to approach her. The woman had on an old quilted jacket, long skirt and high rubber galoshes of the kind worn by many residents of the northern backwoods during the spring and fall. On her head was a kerchief tied so that the forehead and neck were fully covered. It was hard to tell just how old this woman was. I said hello and told her about the two old men I had met the previous year. "It was my grandfather and great-grandfather who talked with you here last year, Vladimir," the woman replied. I was amazed. Her voice sounded very young. Her dictation was crystal clear. She called me by my first name and right off used the informal form of address. I couldn't remember the names of the oldsters or whether we had introduced ourselves at all. I thought now we must have done so, since this woman knew my name. I asked her, deciding to continue in the same informal tone, "And how do you call yourself?" "Anastasia," the woman answered, stretching out her hand toward me, palm down, as though expecting me to kiss it. This gesture of a countrywoman in a quilted jacket and galoshes, standing on a deserted shore and trying to act like a lady of the world, amused me no end. I shook her hand. Naturally, I wasn't going to kiss it. Anastasia gave me an embarrassed smile and suggested I go with her into the taiga, to where her family lived. "The only thing is, we shall have to make our way through the taiga, 25 kilometers. That is not too much for you?" "Well, of course, it's rather far, but can you show me the ringing cedar?" "Yes, I can." "You know all about that. You'll tell me. I shall tell you what I know. Then let's go." Along the way, Anastasia told me how their family, their kin, had been living in the cedar forest generation after generation, as their forebears had said, over the course of several millennia. It is only extremely rarely that they find themselves in direct contact with people from our civilized society. These contacts do not occur in their places of permanent residence, but only when they come into the villages under the guise of hunters or travellers from some other settlement. Anastasia herself had been to two big cities, Tomsk and Moscow, but only for one day each, not even to stay the night. She wanted to see whether she might have been mistaken in her perceptions about the lifestyle of city people. So she saved the money for the trips by selling berries and dried mushrooms. A local village woman had lent her a passport. Anastasia did not approve of her grandfather and great-grandfather's idea of giving the ringing cedar with its healing properties to a whole lot of people. When asked why, she replied that the pieces of cedar would be scattered among evildoers as well as good people. In all probability, the majority of the pieces would be snatched up by negative-thinking individuals. In the final analysis, they might end up doing more harm than good. The most important thing, in her opinion, was to promote the good and to help people through whom the good was accomplished. If everyone were benefited at random, the imbalance between good and evil would not be changed, but would stay the same or even get worse. After my encounter with the Siberian oldsters, I looked through a variety of popular science literature as well as a host of historical and scholarly works describing the unusual properties of the cedar. Now I was trying to penetrate and comprehend what Anastasia was saying about the lifestyle of the cedar people, and thinking to myself, now what, if anything, can that be compared to? I thought about the Lykovs, a true story many Russians are familiar with, from the account of Vasily Peskov of another family that lived an isolated life for many years in the taiga. They were written up in the paper Komsomolskaya Pravda under the headline Dead End in the Taiga, and were the subject of television programs. I had formulated for myself an impression of the Lykovs as people who knew nature pretty well, but had a rather fuzzy concept of our modern civilized life. But this was a different situation. Anastasia gave the impression of someone who was perfectly acquainted with our life, and with something else besides that I couldn't fathom at all. She was quite at ease discussing our city life, which she seemed to know firsthand. We walked along, getting deeper into the woods, and after about 5 kilometres stopped to rest. At this point she took off her jacket, kerchief and long skirt and placed them in the hollow of a tree. All she was wearing now was a short, lightweight frock. I was dumbstruck at what I saw. If I were a believer in miracles, I would put this down to something like extreme metamorphosis. For now, here before me stood a very young woman with long golden hair and a fantastic figure. Her beauty was most unusual. It would be hard to imagine how any of the winners of the world's most prestigious beauty contests could rival her appearance, or as it later turned out, her intellectual prowess. Everything about this Taiga girl was alluring, simply spellbinding. "You're probably tired," asked Anastasia. "Would you like to rest for a while?" We sat down right on the grass, and I was able to get a closer look at her face. There were no cosmetics covering her perfect features. Her lovely, well-toned skin bore no resemblance to the weather-beaten faces of people I knew who lived in the Siberian backwoods. Her large, greyish-blue eyes had a kindly look, and her lips betrayed a gentle smile. As indicated, she wore a short, lightweight smock, something like a nightshirt, at the same time giving the impression that her body was not all cold, in spite of the 12 to 15 degree temperatures. I decided to have a bite to eat. I reached into my bag and took out sandwiches, along with a travel bottle filled with good cognac. I offered to share it with Anastasia, but she refused the cognac, and for some reason even declined to eat with me. While I was snacking, Anastasia lay on the grass, her eyes blissfully closed, as though inviting the sun's rays to caress her. The rays reflected off her upturned palms with a golden glow. Lying there half exposed, she appeared absolutely gorgeous. I looked at her and thought to myself, now, why have women always bared to the limit either their legs or their breasts, or everything at once, with their miniskirts and décolletage? Is it not the appeal to men around them? Is it not to appeal to the men around them, as if to say, look how charming I am, how open and accessible? And what are men obliged to do then? Fight against their fleshly passions and thereby denigrate women with their lack of attention, or make advances toward them and thereby break a God-given law? When I had finished with my refreshment, I asked, Anastasia, you're not afraid of walking through the Taiga alone? There's nothing I have to fear here, replied Anastasia. Interesting, but how would you defend yourself if you happened to encounter 2 or 3 burly men, geologists or hunters, let's say? She didn't answer, only smiled. I thought, how is it that this so extraordinarily alluring young beauty could not be afraid of anyone or anything? What happened next still makes me feel uncomfortable, even to this day. I grabbed her by her shoulders and pulled her close to me. She didn't offer any strong resistance, although I could feel a considerable degree of strength in her resilient body. But I couldn't do anything with her. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was her saying, do not do this, calm down. And even before that, I remember being suddenly overcome by a powerful attack of fear. A fear of what? I couldn't grasp. As sometimes happens in childhood, when you find yourself at home all alone and suddenly become afraid of something. When I woke up, she was on her knees bending over me. One of her hands lay upon my chest, while the other was waving to someone up above, or to either side. She was smiling, though not at me, but rather, it seemed, at someone who was invisibly surrounding us or hovering above us. Anastasia seemed to be literally gesturing to her invisible friend that there was nothing amiss going on. Then she calmly and tenderly looked me in the eye. "Calm down, Vladimir. It is over now." "But what was it?" I asked. "Harmony's disapproval of your attitude toward me, of the desire aroused in you. You will be able to understand it all later." "What's Harmony got to do with it? It's you. It's only that you yourself began to resist." And I too did not accept it. It was offensive to me. I sat up and pulled my bag over to me. "Come on now. She didn't accept me? It was offensive to her? Oh, you women. You just do everything you can to tempt us. You bare your legs, stick out your breasts, walk around in high-heeled shoes. That's very uncomfortable, and yet you do it. You walk and you wiggle with all your charm. But as soon as, oh, I don't need that. I'm not that way. What do you wriggle for then, hypocrites? I'm an entrepreneur and I've seen a lot of your sorts. You all want the same thing, only you all act it out differently. So why did you, Anastasia, take off your outer clothes? The weather's not that hot. And then you lolled about on the grass here with that alluring smile of yours." "I am not that comfortable in clothing, Vladimir. I put it on when I leave the woods and go out among people, but only so I can look like everyone else. I just lay down to relax in the sun and not disturb you while you were eating." "So you didn't want to disturb me? Well, you did. Please forgive me, Vladimir. Of course, you are right about every woman wanting to attract a man's attention, but not just to her legs and breasts. What she wants is not to let pass by the one man who can see more than just those things. But nobody's been passing by here. And what is this more that must be seen, when it's your legs that are front and centre? Oh, you women, you're so illogical." "Yes, unfortunately, that is the way life sometimes turns out. Maybe we should move along, Vladimir. Have you finished eating? Are you rested?" The thought crossed my mind. Is it worth going on with this philosophizing wild woman? But I replied, "Fine, let's go." End of chapter 2. Chapter 3. Beast or Man. We continued our journey to Anastasia's home, her outer clothes left behind in the tree hollow, her galoshes too. She was still wearing the short, lightweight frock. She herself picked up my bag and offered to carry it. Barefoot, she walked ahead of me with an amazingly light and graceful step, waving the bag about her with ease. We talked the whole time. Talking with her on any subject was most interesting, perhaps because she had her own strange ideas about everything. Sometimes Anastasia would whirl about while we were walking. She would turn her face to me, laughing, and keep on walking backwards for a while, quite absorbed in the conversation, without so much as a glance down at her feet. How could she walk like that and not once stumble or prick her bare feet against the knot of a dry branch? We didn't seem to be following any visible path. On the other hand, our way was not hindered by the tangled undergrowth so common in the taiga. As she walked, she would occasionally touch or quickly brush by a leaf or a twig on a bush, or bending over without looking, she would tear off some little blade of grass and eat it, just like a little creature, I thought. When berries were handy, Anastasia would offer me a few to eat as we walked. The muscles of her body didn't seem to have any unusual features. Her overall physique appeared quite average, not too thin, not too plump. A resilient, well-fed, and very beautiful body. But from what I could tell, it possessed a goodly degree of strength and extremely sharp reflexes. Once when I stumbled and started to fall, my arms outstretched in front of me, Anastasia whirled around with lightning speed, quickly placing her free hand under me, and I landed with my chest on her palm, her fingers spread wide. I fell, but my hands did not touch the ground. There she was, supporting my body with the palm of one hand, helping it regain its normal position. During all this time she went on talking, with not the slightest sign of strain. After I had straightened up with the help of her hand, we continued on our way as though nothing whatsoever had happened. For some reason my mind momentarily rested on the gas pistol I had in my bag. With all the interesting conversation, I hadn't realised how much ground we had actually been covering. All at once, Anastasia stopped, put my bag down under a tree, and joyfully exclaimed, "Here we are at home." I looked around, a neat little glade dotted with flowers amidst a host of majestic cedars, but not a single structure to be seen. No kind of shelter at all. In a word, nothing. Not even a primitive lean-to. But Anastasia was beside herself with joy, as though we had arrived at a most comfortable dwelling. "And where is your house? Where do you sleep, eat, take shelter from the rain?" "This is my house, Vladimir. I have everything here." A dark sense of disquiet began to come over me. "Where is this everything? Let's have a tea kettle, so we can at least heat up some water on the fire. Let's have an axe." "I do not have a kettle or an axe, Vladimir, and it would be best not to light a fire." "What are you talking about? She doesn't even have a kettle. The water in my bottle is all gone. You saw when I ate. I even threw the bottle away. Now there's only a couple of swallows of cognac left. To get to the river or the village is a good day's walk. But I'm so tired and thirsty right now. Where do you get water from? What do you drink out of?" Seeing my agitation, Anastasia herself showed signs of concern. She quickly took me by the hand and led me through the glade into the forest, admonishing me along the way. "Not to worry, Vladimir. Please do not get upset. I shall take care of everything. You will have a good rest. You will get a good sleep. I shall take care of everything. You shall not be cold. You are thirsty? I shall give you something to drink right away." Not more than 10 or 15 meters from the glade, beyond a clump of bushes, we came across a small taiga lake. Anastasia quickly scooped up a small quantity of water in her cupped hands and raised it to my face. "Here is some water. Drink it, please." "What? Are you crazy? How can you drink raw water out of some puddle in the woods? You saw how I was drinking Borzomi, which is a popular mineral water from the Caucasus Mountains in Georgia, famous for its health-giving properties." Listen in the notes. "On board ship, even for washing, we pass the river water through a special filter, chlorinate it, ozonize it. It is not a puddle, Vladimir. This is pure, living water, good water, not half-destroyed water like yours. You can drink this water. It is just like mother's milk. Look." Anastasia raised her cupped hands to her lips and took a drink. I blurted out, "Anastasia, are you some kind of beast?" "Why a beast? Because my bed is not like yours? There are no cars, no appliances?" "Because you live like a beast in the forest. You haven't any possessions, and you seem to enjoy that." "Yes, I enjoy living here." "There, you see. You just made my point. Do you consider, Vladimir, that what distinguishes man from all other creatures living on earth in his possession of manufactured objects?" "Yes, but even more precisely, his civilized living conditions." "And do you consider your living conditions to be more civilized?" "Yes, of course you do. But I am not a beast, Vladimir. I am man." End of chapter 3. Chapter 4. Who are they? Subsequently, after spending 3 days with Anastasia and observing how this strange young woman lives all by herself in the remote Siberian taiga, I began to understand a little something of her lifestyle and to be confronted by a number of questions regarding our own. One of them still haunts me to this day. Is our system of education and bringing up children sufficient to comprehend the meaning of existence, to arrange every individual's life priorities in the correct order? Does it help or hinder our ability to make sense of man's essence and purpose? We have set up a vast educational system. It is on the basis of this system that we teach our children and each other. In kindergarten, school, university, and postgraduate programs. It is this system that enables us to invent things, to fly into space. We structure our lives in accordance with it. Through its help, we strive to construct some happiness for ourselves. We strive to fathom the universe and the atom, along with all sorts of anomalous phenomena. We love to discuss and describe them at great length in sensational stories in both the popular press and scholarly publications. But there is one phenomenon which, for some reason, we try with all our might to avoid, desperately try to avoid. One gets the impression that we are afraid to talk about it. We are afraid, I say, because it could so easily knock the wind out of our commonly accepted systems of education and scientific deductions and make a mockery of the reality of our experience. And we try to pretend that such a phenomenon does not exist, but it does, and it will continue to exist, however much we try to turn away from it or avoid it. Isn't it time to take a closer look at this and just maybe, through the collective effort of all our human minds together, find an answer to the following question? If we take all our great thinkers, without exception, people who have formulated religious teachings, all sorts of teachings, which the vast majority of humanity are following, or at least endeavouring to follow, why is it that, before formulating their teachings, they become recluses, went into solitude, in most cases to the forest? Not to some super academy, mind you, but to the forest. Why did the Old Testament Moses go off to a mountain-top forest before returning and presenting to the world the wisdom set forth on his tablets of stone? Why did Christ Jesus go off away from his disciples into the desert, mountains and forest? Why did a man named Siddhartha Gautama, who lived in India in the 6th century BC, spend 7 years alone in the forest, after which this recluse came out of the forest, back to humanity, complete with a set of teachings which even to this day, many centuries later, arouse a multitude of human minds? And people build huge temples and call these teachings Buddhism, and the man himself eventually came to be known as Buddha. And what about our own not-so-ancient forebears, now acknowledged as historical figures? Men such as Seraphim Sarovsky or Sergei Radomsky. Why did they too go off to become recluses in the forest? And how were they able, after a short period of time there, to so fathom the depths of wisdom that the kings of this world made the long journey through uncharted wilderness to seek their advice? Monasteries and majestic temples were raised at the location of their respective solitudes. Thus, for example, the Trinity Sergiev Monastery in the town of Sergiev Posad near Moscow today attracts thousands of visitors each year, and it all started from a single forest recluse. Why, who, or what enabled these people to obtain their wisdom? Who gave them knowledge? Who brought them closer to understanding the essence of life? How did they live? What did they do? What did they think about during their forest solitude? These questions confronted me sometime after my conversations with Anastasia, after I had started reading everything that I could lay my hands on regarding recluses. But even today I haven't found answers. Why has nothing been written about their solitude experiences? The answers, I think, must be sought through a collective effort. I am trying to describe the events of my 3-day stay in the Siberian taiga forest and my impressions of my experience with Anastasia, in the hopes that someone will be able to fathom the essence of this phenomenon and put together a clearer picture of our way of life. For now, on the basis of all that I have seen and heard, only one thing is crystal clear to me. People who live in solitude in the forest, including Anastasia, see what is going on in our lives from a point of view completely different from our own. Some of Anastasia's ideas are the exact opposite of what is commonly accepted. Who is closer to the truth? Who can judge? My task is simply to record what I have seen and heard, and thereby give others an opportunity to come up with answers. Anastasia lives in the forest, altogether alone. She has no house to call her own, she hardly wears any clothes, and does not store any provisions. She is the descendant of people who have been living there for thousands of years and represents what is literally a whole different civilization. She and those like her have survived to the present day through what I can only term the wisest possible course of action, very likely the correct course of action. When they are among us, they blend in with us, trying to appear no different from ordinary people, but in their place of habitual residence they merge with nature. It is not easy to find their habitual dwelling places. Indeed, man's presence in such places is betrayed only by the fact that they are more beautiful and better taken care of, like Anastasia's forest glade, for example. Anastasia was born here and is an integral part of the natural surroundings. In contrast to our celebrated recluses, she did not go off into the forest simply for a time, as they did. She was born in the taiga and visits our world only for brief periods. And what seemed at first glance to be a mysterious phenomenon, the strong fear that overwhelmed me and made me lose consciousness when I attempted to possess Anastasia, turned out to have an altogether simple explanation. Just as we tame a cat, a dog, an elephant, a tiger, an eagle, and so on, here everything around has been tamed, and this everything cannot permit anything bad to happen to her. Anastasia told me that when she was born, and while she was still under a year old, her mother could leave her alone on the grass. "And you didn't die from hunger?" I asked. The taiga recluse first looked at me in surprise, but then explained, "Food should be absolutely of no concern to man. One should eat just as one breathes, not paying attention to nutrition, not distracting one's thought from more important issues. The Creator has left that task up to others, so that man can live as man, fulfilling his own destiny." She snapped her fingers, and right away a little squirrel popped up beside her, hopping onto her hand. Anastasia lifted the creature's muzzle to her mouth, and the squirrel passed from its mouth into hers a cedar nut seed, its shell already removed. This did not seem to me anything out of the ordinary. I remembered how back at the academic complex near Novosibirsk, a lot of squirrels were quite used to people and would beg for food from passers-by, and even get angry if they weren't given anything. Here I was simply observing the process in reverse. But this here was the taiga, and I said, "In the normal world, our world, everything's arranged differently. You, Anastasia, could try snapping your fingers at a privately run kiosk or even beat on a drum, and nobody would give you anything. Yet here you're saying the Creator decided everything. Who is to blame if man has decided to change the Creator's creative design? Whether it is for the better or for the worst, that is up to you to divine." This is the kind of dialogue I had with Anastasia on the question of human sustenance. Her position is simple. It is sinful to waste thought on things like food, and she does not think about it. But for us in our civilized world, as it happens, we are obliged to give it thought. We know from books, reports in the press and TV programs of a multitude of examples of infants who have been found themselves out in the wilds and ended up being fed by wolves. In this case, however, generations of people have made their permanent residence here, and their relationship in the animal kingdom is different from ours. I asked Anastasia, "Why aren't you cold, when here I am in a warm jacket?" "Because," she replied, "the bodies of people who wrap themselves up in clothing and shelter themselves from the cold and heat more and more lose their ability to adapt to changes in the environment. In my case, this capacity of the human body has not been lost, and so I really have no need of any clothing." End of chapter 4. Start of chapter 5, because it's only one page long. A forest bedroom. I wasn't at all equipped to spend a night in the wilds of the forest. Anastasia put me to bed in some kind of cave hollowed out of the ground. Exhausted after my wearying trek, I soon fell fast asleep. When I woke up, I felt a sense of bliss and comfort, as though I were lying on a magnificently comfortable bed. The cave, or dugout, was spacious, the floor covered with small, feathery cedar twigs and dried grass, which filled the surrounding space with a fragrant aroma. As I stretched and spread my limbs, one hand touched a furry pelt, and I determined at once that Anastasia must be something of a hunter. I moved closer to the pelt, pressing my back to its warmth, and decided to have another little snooze. Anastasia was standing near the entranceway to my forest bedroom. Noticing I was awake, she said at once, "May this day come to you with blessings, Vladimir, and I invite you, in turn, to greet it with your blessing. Only please, do not be frightened." Then she clapped her hands, and all at once the pelt. I was horror-struck at the realization that this was no pelt. Out of the cave, a huge bear began to gingerly crawl. Receiving a pat of approval from Anastasia, the bear licked her hand and began lumbering off into the forest. It turned out that she had placed some belladonna herbs on my head and made the bear lie down beside me so I wouldn't get cold. She herself had curled up outdoors in front of the entranceway. Now, how could you do such a thing to me, Anastasia? You could have torn me to shreds or crushed me to death. First of all, it is not a he, but a she-bear. She could not possibly have done anything to harm you, Anastasia responded. She's very obedient. She really enjoys it when I give her tasks to carry out. She never even budged the whole night, just nuzzled her nose up to my legs and kept blissfully still. She was so happy. Only she did give a little shudder whenever you waved your arms about in your sleep and slapped her backside. The end of chapter 5.